Hotter than the weather at the moment. It's a property market, and we're going to talk now about the whole process of bidding on houses for sale, because the government recently published a report from an expert group set up to examine conveyancing and probate. And in 2023, the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said the whole process from bidding to probate would be examined. And he highlighted at the time, you might remember, the Scottish system of closed or blind bidding, and criticised the problems of bidding wars that we have here right now. By God, do we have them, based on the text which I'll get to 51551 as well. The Department of Justice has told this programme today that the expert group gave preliminary consideration to the question of bidding and sealed bidding, but did not make any recommendations on further regulation. There are no plans to amend the legislation in this area, they say. The current programme for government contains, though, a commitment to set up another expert group on the bidding system. So should it change? Should the bidding system change? That's our question today. We heard one direct experience from Katrina earlier in the programme, who's been through this recently. We have so many texts on this as well. For example, a listener says the house bidding process has been opaque and awful for many years, not just recently. Suits the real estate industry. They have you over a barrel, says that listener. Another says, same experience as Katrina last month. I was the highest bidder, but they sold to a lower bidder. Heartbreaking, says that listener, and baffling as well. Well, I'm joined now by Rory Hearne, who's Social Democrats spokesperson on housing. And I'm also joined by two estate agents for their take on this. Regina Mangan, who's Managing Director of Liberty Blue Estate Agents in Waterford, and Don Colleran of Colleran Auctioneers in Galway. You're all very welcome to the programme. Rory Hearne of the Social Democrats, I might turn to you first of all. No recommendations made by the expert group, but a commitment in the programme for government to set up another group to look at the bidding process again. Is that necessary at this point?
I think it is, Cormac, and good afternoon to you and your listeners. I think what's very clear from the home buyers' experience that was outlined earlier, which is a story that we're seeing played out across the country, and again from your texts from your listeners, and from what I've heard, people contacting me over many years in relation to this, there's a huge problem with a lack of transparency in the house buying market in terms of bidding. And, you can see it, the evidence is there. House prices up 40% since 2020, since COVID. Mm-hmm. And, when we look at the reality of what's going on out there, these bidding wars, driving up prices, phantom bids, people not clear, where are these bids coming from, house prices going for, 100 grand over the asking price.
But aren't they regulated, Rory?
Well, this is the problem. They're not really. This system is not clearly not properly regulated. And just to come back to your opening question there on this commitment in the programme for government to set up a working group that would look at bidding, I'm quite surprised, that there now basically appears to be rolling back on that commitment, that the initial group that was set up a number of years ago to look at this, sorry, not specifically bidding, but to look at the issue of probate, and has made a recommendation, but it has made the recommendation without any in-depth analysis of the bidding process. So I don't think it's fair for
they have looked at it in a preliminary way, they say, and they didn't make any recommendations for further regulation. But you see, for further regulation suggests that there is regulation. You say there isn't adequate or real regulation. Let me bring in the estate agents for a second, if I may, and I'll come back to your promise. Don Colleran, no real regulation here in the bidding process at all. Is he right?
No, he's not, Cormac. There is regulation, and quite strong regulation as we speak. And I'm just looking here at our own system. Everybody who's bidding with us bids by email. So it's as transparent as you can get. It's the name of the person, the time, the date they sent it in, and that's transferred in onto a bidding sheet. So I'm looking at a bidding sheet on a property here today, and there's about 8 bidders, and the exact time, the date, the bid, the comments are all here in front of me.
Rory says phantom bids.
Well, phantom bids, this is going back to what Katrina was talking about earlier in your, and I think she summed it up very well. She said it's an extremely stressful and frustrating time for what should be a happy and exciting time.
Exactly.
And as an auctioneer, that's what I'm experiencing every week. with young buyers. You must remember the auctioneers are meeting the same people every week. We develop a connection with these people as well. So it's very stressful for everybody.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you do this, but she talked about being ignored almost by the estate agent. Having the sale going to a lower bid, Don. I couldn't get over that. I mean, can you explain that to me?
Absolutely, Cormac. And firstly, I think it might have been a personal thing between her and maybe that particular office. And that's only a one-off example.
I don't know about that now, but it's just in general. Okay, another person by text has made that point as well. I don't understand how that could happen.
I'll explain that.
Yeah. So if you're in a situation where everybody thinks the highest bid wins, suddenly you make the highest bid and you don't get the house.
But the highest bid, Cormac, isn't necessarily the best bid. And you have to look into... No, you have to look into the proof of funds. How secure are their funds? So if you have a cash buyer who's buying your house, Cormac, as against somebody who might be subject to the sale of, or subject to their loan, or subject to something else, you're going to turn to your agent and say, look, if he's a cash buyer, rather than that extra 10,000 that I might have to wait another 2 or 3 months or might not materialise at all, I'll take the lesser bid. So that would regularly happen in the market.
Would you advise a client as well, if you have a cash buyer with the cash on the table there and somebody who's mortgage approved now, not subject to a sale or anything, but mortgage approved, you say go for the cash, it's quicker?
No. You're talking about, no, if they're mortgage approved and 100%, they're like for like.
Well, they were the situations that, like for like, they were the situations that, in the examples that we were getting by text as well. 51551. Let me bring in, before I go back to Rory, Regina Mangan, who's an estate agent in the Jaysha, lovely Waterford. I mean, that's something that really grates on people, really frustrates people in a market when they're really pushing themselves, Regina, to buy their home, and suddenly they don't think it's fair or transparent, the system.
It's a really, really rough time for buyers. And Katrina, when I was listening to her, she was talking about her different experiences with different agents. That's where I think transparency is very important. And in the age of technology and how we all want things quickly when we book hotels and how our whole buyer experience, I think technology needs to be embraced by more agents. So, for example, when a buyer is placing a bid on an online bidding platform such as we use called Offer, they must upload their proof of funds. Yes, their identity is blocked from other bidders because that wouldn't be appropriate to share their identity. But we won't take bids from people who are not purchase ready. So, for example, we have a property in County Waterford and it's 6,000 over the asking at the moment. We had a lady up the country in Leinster who wanted to place a bid, but she hasn't her house on the market. And I said, we can't register you. We cannot take your bid. So we wouldn't take her bid and have her competing with this mortgage approved bidder because that's inflating the price. In an incorrect way, and it wouldn't be ethical.
Yeah, and Katrina spoke about the portal system online, and I think it was, if my recollection is right, probably more positive than the other systems.
It's fantastic.
But I also asked her about the blind bidding system they have in Scotland, and I know you spoke to a Scottish colleague today about that. Would that be better for us to have here, do you think, Regina?
Well, we need to get under the bonnet of it, right, and actually understand it. So I had an hour's chat this morning with Jim in Scotland, who informed me that it's a very, very buoyant market. It's a seller's market in Scotland, and only 20% of bids are actually sealed bids. But it's also very important to note that buyers are no better off because it's not legally binding. So, for example, a property is on the market in Scotland and you have 2 to 3 bidders. It's heating up. They say, right, let's close this out next Thursday at 2:00. Put your best foot forward.
Yeah.
Now, that does happen in Ireland. Some agents do that in some instances with the instruction from their client.
Worse with the system we have here, Regina,
right.
put to you.
Well, no, but sometimes people do the seal bids in Ireland. That does happen. We don't do it in our office, but some agents do it. But here's the thing. When you go back, and sometimes there's buyer's remorse because they realise that they bid maybe too much because they kind of think maybe I put on too much above. And then other people are thinking, when they see it recorded in Scotland, if they'd only put another 500, maybe they'd have gotten the house.
Yeah, but I mean, that's always going to be the way, isn't it? But the problem we have with the system in Ireland...
it's not.
But hang on a second here now. The problem we have with the system in Ireland is that it's almost like a 100-metre dash. There's a rate, there's a bid in today, there's a bid in tomorrow morning, there's a bid in tomorrow afternoon, and you're pushing yourself and the other competitors. Because that's what it is. It's a competition to buy a bloody home. And it inflates house prices, doesn't it, Regina?
Well, look, it certainly does have an impact, but the market decides. And going back to the Scottish one, it is not a clean process, because at the end of the day, in Scotland, the vendor is the decision maker, the very same way the vendor, the seller, is the decision maker in Ireland. They can decide to go with the underbidder because they look at the bids and they may not go with the highest bidder, as Don already pointed out.
Yeah.
But I do think it comes back to best practice. And I do think the transparent system where bidders can see what's going on. But we do have a bigger problem with the whole system, much bigger problem, which is the whole conveyancing, the whole saleability of property, placing properties on the market before they're actually ready to go on the market, with issues with boundaries, title, and everything.
I know. You could do another bloody hour on that. But let's
the point
keep
is the government. Yeah, but I appreciate I'm going off piste for a minute. But this bill is in front of the Dáil for the last while, a long while. It could take another couple of years before they sort it out. But it's lots of different things that actually cause the problem.
I take that point. No, I take that point. And speed up the conveyancing process as well.
Yes.
Because it slows everything down. But let's keep this conversation to the bidding process.
Sure.
I'll come back to Rory Hearne. But let me read a text or two. In terms of the Scottish system, the blind bids, a listener says, I was going to mention the Scottish system. It really gives a true value of the property. It's what the general public think it's worth and what they're willing to pay. But on the negative side of the Scottish system, another listener, Perth in Australia operate a similar bidding process as Scotland. However, there are always ways around it. A relative of mine just happened to play golf with a real estate agent associated with the house they were interested in. Just before the closing date for bids, he was told how much he had to bid to get the house, and he got it. Property markets seem to be having the same struggles globally. I tell you, golf has an awful lot to answer for. Can I go back to Rory Hearne? Regina said something that maybe sums up the whole conversation here. The market decides, she said. And it doesn't matter which system you have, the market decides, and that's the problem here, is it not?
Well, to a certain extent, of course it is. If you've limited supply, limited supply of affordable housing, huge demand, the pressure is upwards on prices, regardless of what you do. But there is clearly, from, the evidence that we have, from what, listeners coming in, there are clearly problems with the way the property market is working. The bidding process in particular is contributing to inflating prices. When we look at this, what's going on. And, I mentioned earlier the need for regulation. There is a Property Services Regulatory Authority. I don't think it's working in terms of regulating properly in terms of what's going on. And also the government needs to move to implement its commitment in the programme for government to set up a working group to look at this. The Scottish, and also it's done in France, the sealed bids approaches would help things.
Yeah, but would they though? Would
help.
They? I mean, you have people outline the difficulties, and you heard Don there. Everything is above board and transparent in Don's office. I mean, you can't quibble with that at all.
Well, that might be the case in Don's office, but it's clearly not the case in all estate agents around the country and what is going on. Well, you've just heard the evidence from your own.
I've heard frustration.
From Katrina earlier.
No, I've heard frustration.
And you hear, but people are coming to me and people are very, very clearly saying that there are bids, phantom bids. There is still gazumping going on. There is still these inflationary practices that it appears that some estate agents are engaged in, some auctioneers, and we need to know. And so absolutely, I think what we need is the report done, and I would call on the Minister to do that.
Okay.
We need transparency, and this government seems to have an issue with transparency,
well,
but we need transparency around this. But I do think they need to do this.
Yeah, stay with me, Rory, for a second. A quick text or two, and I'll get Don to respond. We bid on a house recently for €320,000, a tiny suburban house with no garden, 2 single bedrooms and no storage space. A bidding war then apparently ensued, and from 320 in a matter of days it went up to 460. It's very concerning, says that listener. One more. A relative of mine sold a house recently. The selling agent suggested putting the house up for 420 and then quipped, you'll get about 490. We thought this practice to be strange and unfair to any hopeful purchaser. I mean, this is a sick market, Don, isn't it?
The problem here, Cormac, and you and I discussed this, I think, many months ago. It's not the bidding process. You could find fault with the best bidding process out there. It's the lack of supply.